Here is an interesting stat I heard on CNBC. Typically, when the S&P falls 20%, recession probability jumps to 60%. In a work-from-home economy, is it now just a matter of time before a recession kicks in? Let's talk about it. What's happening, everyone? Welcome to Think Finance. My name is Raj, and on this channel, I talk about personal finance, investment ideas, money management tips, and all things finance. If you're new to the channel and if money gets you excited, consider subscribing. In this video, I wanted to discuss what is recession, what are the key indicators, also discuss the dreaded inverted curve that economists consider a key in predicting recession. Recently, I did a video on bear market and ways to see it coming. If you've not seen that video, I strongly recommend you watch that video first and then watch this one. Link on the screen and in the description. In that video, I introduced the concept of business cycle and how it relates to the economy. National Bureau of Economic Research, or NBER, leads this work. In the business cycle, a recession is the period between peak and the trough, or when the economy is contracting. Again, watch that video if you need some more clarity. The NBER defines recession as a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months. Economists look at a number of indicators to define recession. For example, a decline in GDP for 2 consecutive quarters, a rise in unemployment, reduction in personal income, and so forth. Of these, the real GDP is considered the most important indicator. When GDP growth turns negative or contracts, it could signal a recession. While most of the indicators confirm the argument that we are in recession, there is one that is considered to provide early warning and can actually forecast a recession. This, my friends, is the dreaded yield curve. When you hear about recession, chances are you will hear about the inverted yield curve as well. In order to understand the inverted curve, we need to talk about yields. Let's get some concepts clear. The government issues short and long-term bonds for investors. Bonds are investment tools that allow investors to lend money to the government for a certain period of time. In return, the government promises to pay interest regularly, and when the bond agreement ends or matures, investors get their money back. Just like stocks, bonds have a face value and a yield or interest associated to it. Short-term bonds offer less yield compared to the long-term bonds. Long-term bonds come with risk and uncertainty for which investors expect a premium that is reflected in a higher yield. Again, just like stocks, demand drives the value of the bond. Higher demand will drive the value of bond up, thereby reducing the yield, and lower demand reduces the value of the bond but drives the yield up. Now let's introduce the yield curve. A yield curve is just a curved line that plots yield or interest rates for bond across different maturity dates. In this chart, 1-year short-term bond has a yield of 0.5% and a 10-year long-term bond has a yield of 2.1%. The curve can be explained in terms of 3 scenarios: happy or normal curve, confused or flat curve, and screwed or the inverted curve. Happy curve is a normal upsloped yield curve, which means investor confidence or sentiment is high. Investors are convinced that future economic growth will be strong. Because of this, they expect a rise in inflation, which means that there is a probability that central bank will implement tighter monetary policy by rising interest rates in future to slow down growth and put a check on inflation. And since all of this bring risk, investors expect higher yield on long-term bonds. This typically is considered a normal situation. Confused or flat yield curve is when the yields are same across the board. It shows that some investors expect slow growth. It could also mean that economic indicators are sending mixed messages and signaling uncertainty in the economy. This mixed signal can lead to a normal curve or could result in an inverted curve, which pretty much means we are screwed. Inverted curve occurs when long-term yields fall below the short-term yield. Investor sentiment is low and investors expect economic downturn in the short term. So assuming investors are right, if you buy a 2-year bond, you will get your money back in a bad economy and there might be nothing good to invest in given the downturn. This results in a lower demand for short-term bonds. This will drive the cost of short-term bonds down, and because of which the yields will go up. Similarly, demand for longer-term bonds will be higher since it matures way in the future, and hopefully by then the economic downturn will be over and investors will have more investment options when they get their money back. Since demand is up, cost for longer-term bonds will be higher, which will result in a lower yield. As demand keeps rising, the yield on long-term bonds will be less than the yield on short-term bonds. This is when we have an inverted yield curve where long-term yield falls below the short-term yield, and investors are expecting an economic downturn in the near future. Now, why do economists go crazy when the curve inverts? Historically, inversions of the yield curve have preceded many recessions in the US. Here's a chart to prove the point. It uses a spread between the yields of the 10-year and 2-year bonds, long and short-term bonds, to determine if the yield curve is inverted. Whenever the spread, which is the blue line, falls below 0, the curve inverts. The gray bars indicate US recession. As you can see, whenever the curve inverted, within a year, US entered recession. Because of the strong correlation, the yield curve is often seen as a way to predict recession. So now here's the scary part. In August 2019, the curve inverted. This is 7 months back. Does this mean we will hit recession soon? See, I don't know. So far, economic indicators are not giving any signals. We recently had a stellar unemployment report. GDP looks fine. Things look normal. But given the recent turn of events, things don't look promising. What I do know is that when the curve inverts, it usually is a warning sign. That's all I have, guys. Super curious to know what you guys think. If this was helpful, hit that lovely like button for me. And if money is your thing, consider subscribing. Until next time, peace.